I like the beginning part to be really, really messy and really creative and have no restrictions. There's gonna be times where it's gonna feel hopeless, like I can't think of anything. And then there's other times where I can't fall asleep because I'm thinking of so many ideas. Today I'm working on a whole new book, which I'm really excited about. It's in very early stages. I've brainstormed a little bit, but I want to show you like the very early stages of me working on a book. So when I first work on a new novel idea, I like to really embrace everything about the lore of this world, because every time I notice I just start writing, to me the plot line isn't the most important. I think for me, it's the vibe and kind of like what I'm going for. I want to show you what I do from getting the idea to starting to write the first draft. So when I first have a really new idea, I like to just get a notebook and just write down anything that comes to my mind. And because I've been learning a lot more about just like the marketing of a book and how to write like with tropes and how to understand plot lines and everything, this story idea was a lot more around that concept. I kind of started with the hook. But when I first wrote my first book, I didn't really understand what the hook was. So I started writing from like a whole like bag of ideas. But now, since I know that you need to start with like a hook and then expand from that, when I come up with new ideas, I like to come up with the hook and kind of like what I would do to like pitch a book in the beginning. And of course, music is always great. And I have some candles because gotta love the vibes. So because I'm thinking of a romance, I like to think of like the two main characters, like the FMC and the MMC in this case. And I want to figure out like what about them makes it different. Like what about this romance makes there have stakes and makes it more complex and more intriguing than just a regular romance. For example, I was thinking like, oh, I was thinking about mermaids, and like so this is how like my process works. I'm like, oh, mermaids. I'm like, I love mermaids. Like that's so majestic and beautiful and fantastical, and I want to write about mermaids, but in an adult storyline. I'm like, okay, what goes good with mermaids? Pirates. And I think a lot of times I get inspiration from other books and media and stuff that I'm consuming. So I'm like, pirates and mermaids. I love that. But I notice is usually it's the female that is, it's the FMC that is the mermaid, and the pirate is usually the MMC. So I was like, what if we switched it? So I'm like, okay, male mermaid and female pirate. And then I'm like, okay, how can we make this more interesting? And I start kind of playing with these ideas, and then I'm like, I don't know if I like the idea of a male mermaid. What if the male was a siren? Because that makes it more interesting, where it's like, oh, a siren and a pirate, and a male siren and a female pirate. And I'm like, okay, well, why is the female pirate? Like, what's her story? And then I kind of go into that and I try to figure out like her background. And then I go into the male background. I kind of expand this hook as I keep going to kind of like add different details. And for me, I do a lot of different things to kind of really work on this idea. So right now I have like a web of ideas in this hook, but to be honest, I'm not a natural plotter. I've never been a natural plotter. So as a discovery writer, instead of jumping into the first draft and just trying to write it like completely blind, what I've been doing is I've been thinking of scenes and kind of like images in my head of like what I'm thinking of this story. And then I'll open up Scrivener, and then I'll open a whole new document, and I'll just write like scene, like this scene. And I'll just start writing and kind of like playing with the characters, playing with the setting. And then I'll bounce around from different scenes, and I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna write this scene, and then I'm gonna write this scene, and then I'm gonna see how I like it. And I wanna show you because that's kind of like what I've been doing to kind of flesh out the storyline. And then I'm going to work with this for about a couple weeks and then start the first draft. I like to feel really intuitive when I'm working on new stories. I'll have a word in the middle, and then I'll kind of start webbing out different ideas and not even judge it or anything, just like fully just flesh out all my ideas onto the paper. So I want to show you what I do. I like to open up my computer because I've been using Scrivener to work on my different projects because it helps me organize them in a very like non-linear fashion. I've been going in between while I'm working on this other book and kind of sprinkling in different ideas and different scenes. And I like to really play with the imagination of what this world could be like and what these characters could be like. So I'll think of like an idea of like, oh, this scene in this setting and these characters, and I kind of have a rough idea, and then I go through and then I write, And then that's when the ideas kind of come to me. And by the end of the scene, I know so much more about the characters, the profiles, the world building, the magic system. And it's really cool because I'm almost like working backwards, but it works better for me. So I've been using the flashcard method to just play around with different scene ideas. When I have a hook and I'm like, okay, this hook, this chapter, this story structure, I start to fit a story into this box instead of figuring out the story and then creating the box around the story to then help the story. So this is something that I've been learning through trial and error as I'm working on this new story, because my first story that I've been writing has been very trial and error, and I feel like now I'm trying to figure out methods that work for me. I'm gonna open up a new scene and I'm having a lot of fun with this. Like, I'm just opening a new document. So I'm on Scrivener, I go to new text, I choose which POV I'm going to use. Right now in this story, I'm using 2 dual POVs because it's a fantasy romance and I want to try out that idea. And I'll just choose a random POV, and then I just kind of think of a general idea. I'm like, okay, like what would be like really fascinating in this world and this concept? And then I kind of write it, and then I see how I like it. I kind of like see like, is this the vibe I'm going for? Does this feel right? I think a lot of times like art is really just about like feeling how it feels on the paper, how you're writing it. So I'm going to kind of get into this and then I'll get back to you. So right now I'm in the synopsis area of Scrivener where you have like a little summary. I'm just gonna kind of jot down like a couple bullet points of like what I think would be really cool. Oh, see, even as I was writing this, I just came up with a whole different scene idea. So I'm actually going to do that instead. And I really feel like I'm trying to listen to my intuition. Like when I'm doing this, I'm like, okay, like this is really cool. And I think doing this and just writing different scenes that feel like cool to me, I think I'm kind of saving time, because normally in my first novel, I wrote 3 different drafts to finally get to like the story I was thinking of. And now I can kind of play around with different scenes, and then I can try to then write a first draft. So hopefully I kind of cut out a whole different draft when I'm writing. Okay, so now I'm gonna write a new summary because I just came up with a whole new idea. Okay, it's literally just like a 1-sentence idea that I thought of that kind of goes along with the other scenes that I've been writing. And they're very out of order. Like, I just wrote an intro scene, and then now I'm kind of writing more of a catalyst scene, and then I wrote like a confession, like a love confession scene. So I think like it's fun to kind of play around and see like kind of how this story is gonna work, because I feel like, I think I said this before, but I don't feel like I'm coming up with these stories. I feel like I'm discovering them, and that's something that's been really fun for me because I kind of let it come to me instead of trying to like forcibly think of something. I'm kind of like seeing what comes, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, let me play with this. Let me work with this and like see what happens. Okay, so now I'm going to write a little bit of the scene and then I'll be back. So what's really cool is, as I'm writing this, whenever I heard this piece of advice that whenever you come up with a new idea, just start writing as if you've already been writing about that idea. So instead of going back and changing everything, you just continue writing as if that aspect of your story is already reality. So I literally just changed my idea within a sentence and continue writing this new idea. I'm horrible with coming up with names of people, cities, places. I'm really bad at the very small details, like describing someone's physical features or describing anything about this world that I need to research. I just love getting to like the general feel and the general bones of a story, which is fun, but it's also really hard to write when you don't really know what you're writing about. So I'm kind of thinking like this scene that I'm writing, it's working, but it's not exactly feeling like how I want to. So honestly, now that I'm feeling kind of stuck, I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to go to my mood board on Pinterest. I open up my mood board for this kind of story idea, and instantly I'm just like, yes, this is what I want to write about. I'm going to kind of look at the vibes, kind of add new things that I want to add to it, and then maybe go back to writing a bit later and see how I feel. I make a Spotify playlist for every new idea that I have. So sometimes I'll listen to it when I'm writing or when I'm just kind of like feeling out this idea. And it's really fun because then I go through and I kind of like daydream and like visualize and picture like different moments and snapshots of this story to kind of like piece it together. I think when it comes to being creative, it's something that is so nuanced because it's hard because you don't want to force it, but you also have to cultivate it. It's something where sometimes you will have those moments where ideas will flash to you and you will feel so creative, you don't have to try, and that will be natural and you'll be in flow. But other times you kind of have to kind of fuel your creativity, at least for me. Listen to songs, kind of picture things, look at pictures, be in certain environments, maybe be close to nature. Sometimes I have to train my environment in order to fuel that creativity. And right now, I'm not feeling like super naturally creative, but I still want to put work in, because if I want to make this a career, if I want to continue with these goals, I can't just wait whenever I feel creative, because that's not very efficient. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to listen to some kind of music, and then I'm going to kind of still look at these Pinterest images and just kind of like embrace this idea and just kind of like think about it and see what comes to my brain. It's literally been like 2 minutes of me listening to music and looking at Pinterest, and I'm already like, oh, I have so many ideas. So I'm gonna open up my handy notebook, which I use for literally everything, and I'm gonna start like adding to the word map that I had. And this is kind of like a cycle of what I do. Like, I'll like listen to music, I'll look at pictures, I'll think of these ideas, and then I'll kind of write them down and I'll try to flesh them out, and then I'll go and try to write a scene and see how I'm gonna work with this all together. And then I kind of keep going in that cycle until I feel like I have like a real story that I can work with. Literally just looking at this image, I'm like, yes. Looking at different like art, you can kind of see what's your taste, and then that kind of helps influence like. So it's the next day, and I'm going to be working on that new book idea that I have. So I want to kind of keep vlogging it and showing my process and how I go through everything, because I'm still learning as I'm going, and I think it's fun to document it and then look back and then kind of see what I learned, and then hopefully it inspires and helps other people as well. Last time I was working on this scene, it wasn't really working, so I think I'm gonna spend some time first listening to music, kind of looking at Pinterest, which is so fun, and then I'm gonna start writing another scene and seeing how I feel. So even after looking at Pinterest for like 2 minutes, I found an image, and I have an image of something that's in my book, and then I'm gonna kind of look at it and be like, okay, what's a scene that I could make up from this? So I already have an idea, so now I'm gonna go write it. Okay, I just wrote a scene, and it actually went a lot better than I thought. It was about like, it's around like 400 words, so it's just really short, like snippet. But what's really helpful is by looking at that picture of that one character in a setting, and then using that as a jumping off point to then kind of experiment with this idea. I feel like I was able to really like expand my brainstorming, and even from this scene, I have new ideas pop into my head the more I expand. So as I'm writing, I'll like think of something and then I'll kind of write it out. And a lot of this, like most of this will not make the final book, but I think just playing with this idea and kind of letting myself get immersed in this world is helping me so much. I'm really loving it, because I feel like I'm able to really immerse myself and then discover it as I go. I feel so much better about this idea than even yesterday. Okay, so it's the next day, still working on this book idea. Whenever I have a new idea for a project, I like to look at what's already out there in that genre and in that concept, to see how I like it, and then how I can add to it, and like what is kind of open in that area that people are liking. So I got To Kill a Kingdom, if that gives you kind of a hint at what I'm writing. I read this book when I first got my idea, and it kind of solidified like some of the concepts that I really wanted to go for, and it also talked about a lot of similar fantasy elements that I want to write about. So it was really cool, because like it gives you kind of like more inspiration and also more direction, but also shows you what you want to do differently. Now I was thinking like my whole brainstorming stage of like, oh, I write, and then I look at Pinterest, and then I listen to music, and then it's like a whole thing. Another part that I want to talk about is research, because especially in fantasy, I feel like so much lore is necessary, where you need to know like so much about your fantasy world and like the people that live in it and the creatures and everything. So for me, I want to do more research, and I actually looked up like I was listening to like mythology videos, because I feel like there's so much information there, and I think that's one of the really fun things is when you write stories, you get to like kind of think about ideas and kind of like expand on them. I'm gonna look up some research and kind of like take down notes, and then see like what I want to work off of. I'm doing research and I have about like a couple pages of notes. The two characters in this book, they both have very distinct identities, and that's what kind of pits them against each other. So I want to make sure I like represent these identities well. Even though they're fantastical and there's room for being creative, I want it to still kind of represent the history and the mythology of that group of being. So I've been doing lots of research on like characteristics and the history and the foundation of a lot of these identities. And it's been really cool because then I get like ideas and I'm like, oh, and then I could connect it to this and then to this. I was listening to my music and I was like locked in and I was looking at pictures and I was literally researching it like I would research like a presentation. Like I was researching like the history of this and then I was like, is it a good source? Like today wasn't a very like writing heavy brainstorming day, but I feel like I got a lot of progress in like understanding the foundation of what I'm writing about. That was kind of like a few days of me doing brainstorming. It looks different every day. In the early stages of brainstorming, I'm super big on making sure that I get to express my creativity and I don't have any walls that kind of restrict that. So I think I'm going to give myself at least a couple more weeks to just like fully embrace this idea and really like match stuff together and really just like flesh out this idea. And then I'm gonna start writing the first draft, which will be super fun. And I think before I write the first draft, I wanna plot out roughly what the story is gonna be, but I wanna leave a lot up to creativity because I do tend to discover the story as I go. So I think I'm going to really flesh out the main characters and like the arc of their arc together because that's like the main plot of the story. And then everything else is going to kind of come together and the world is going to kind of show itself as I write. But I think really understanding your main characters and their motivations and their fears and their goals are really important for like driving the story forward. So yeah, I'm really excited. I want to do like more like documentation and vlogging of like my experience writing a book and sharing it because I feel like this type of stuff inspired me to start writing, so hopefully it'll help other people too. And I want to say good luck on your projects and happy writing, and thank you for joining.